On today's episode, I am joined by a doctor and cult expert who has helped thousands of individuals recover from undue influence and mind control. He goes into detail about the ways in which social media use may be altering our brain chemistry, explains how to combat digital addiction, and discusses the potential consequences that modern technology has on both our mental health and society. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Dr. Stephen Hassan, and this is Uncovering the Truth. Dr. Hassan, I want to start out with a little bit of a curveball. Before we were recording, you said that you have always been critical of cryptocurrency. Now, why is that?
Good question. So it goes back to my work with people in cults and brainwashing and mind control. And as you may remember, I wrote a book that first came out in 1988 called Combating Cult Mind Control. And by the way, that book got updated dramatically after the internet back in 2015. And I'm mentioning that because my original book didn't talk about multi-level marketing cults or pyramid schemes, but I started hearing from a lot of ex-Amway people, but endless multi-level marketing things. And they read my book and they're like, it was a cult. And then we started analyzing it by the bite model. In fact, on my freedomofmind.com website, I have a number of blogs as well as a bite model analysis, which stands for behavior control, information control, thought control, and emotional control. And the gist of those groups is they sell you a dream of being wealthy part-time, and they show all these glorious pictures of yachts and mansions and Rolex watches, et cetera, and the way these groups work is the people who start them make a lot of money, and maybe the first level or two that get in make money, but the rest of it is based on what I heard Bill Gates actually say about crypto when he was asked. It's based on the greater fool theory, which is if you can recruit a lot of other people to buy into the dream, you make the money, they lose the money as it gets bigger and bigger, and then it collapses, or the authorities go after you and shut it down. And I'll just comment that Keith Raniere, who is featured in the Vow Nexium cult, is in jail for 120 years for trafficking, started out as an MLM. He had Consumers Byline, and 20 attorneys general sued him and went after him, shut it down. And then he started another MLM cult using Nancy Salzman as his front person, selling coaching as a franchise kind of thing. But it's all based on a dream and a fantasy. And regarding crypto, it always struck me as like, if everyone goes to crypto, who pays for the firemen and the policemen and the road work? And, you know, how does that support a culture where we have mutual survival? And I realized in interacting with friends like Dave Troy and other people who've done a deeper dive than me with crypto, it's a fascist attempt to overthrow democracies, to basically create a way of sharing funds for terrorist organizations and for extremist, illegal drug traffic and labor trafficking and sex trafficking. And it's like, whoa, but I want to just say, if I may, Dash, the number one rule in this information warfare space that we're all living in is what's the source? Like, who is the source of this information? And when you think about Bitcoin, nobody knows who started it. This Satoshi, who is it? Is it Peter Thiel? Is it Elon Musk? Is it a group of people? There are names that are probably at the very top of this, but it's really supporting anarchists, people who want to destroy civilization as we know it and set up such a authoritarian thing. So I'm very negative on crypto.
Right. If I could just, okay, I'll process that. And But how is it any different though than, let's say, any other resource that we place value in, and whoever gets in at the bottom first, like, what they call the quote unquote whale with a lot of capital who benefits the most when more people buy in? But how is this any different than the stock market where the big banks have all in, and
Because there's
I know,
the,
and really quickly, there's a lot. Oh, I'll let you go. Yeah,
no,
sorry.
I think the critical thing is if there's government regulation and checks and balances to protect investors, fine to have digital currency, or we already are moving money digitally all over the place with banks. That's not the problem. The problem is that it's an attempt to crash the US economy and get rid of the US dollar as the world reserve currency and set up China or some other bad actor, or just crypto, where the billionaire corporate people have a game that everyone else is being puppets to.
But I would argue that actually it's the same thing going on in Wall Street, where it is all a game, and then the poor people are most people. Nobody beats the S&P 500 except for the big Wall Street traders. And
Absolutely. There are definitely problems and there are definitely abuses of the system, but there is something called insider trading. If you can catch somebody or have a whistleblower, then that person can go to jail. Like this is like the
crypto,
wild,
there's
wild west, where there's no regulation, there's no protections. And
it,
and
is this
basically, the critical thing is whether or not we care about living in together in a civilized way, or we believe in Ayn Rand cultum, that selfishness is great, altruism is evil, and believe in social Darwinism. Hey, I have a lot of money, therefore I'm superior to everybody else, and so let them starve, but my family will be fine. Like, that's not how I view reality.
well, that's a whole other problem of humanity, where some of us prioritize greed over connection and stepping on people's throats to make a profit. But just for the cryptocurrency in itself, I just don't see how it's any different than it's the modern day gold rush, where who's placing all of this value in gold back then, correct? Same way now. Is there any value to digital currency? Maybe not, but again, there is one aspect of it that is decentralized finance that takes away power from the oligarchs, from the big Wall Street firms. And yes, people have gone broke, and there is no regulations, which is a problem. Yet at the same time, it also potentially represents a system for the people. But like you said, it can be exploited by terrorist groups, by traffickers, and it's unregulated. However, it is a transparent network where you can trace who sent the money to who. The blockchain is a transparent thing that shows the trades.
Well, so my understanding of the stock market is that companies actually make things or do things that have value. Warren Buffett made his fortune and for his investors by looking at companies, their books, and seeing whether or not they're undervalued or what the future looks like. But there's something really substantial. This is a dream. This is a fantasy that has no basis in reality. It's not tangible yet. At the point that the US government sets up a system to regulate digital currency, fine with me. But I go back to who started Bitcoin?
It's very interesting.
Is it just, spending millions and millions with actors and influencers to convince them of courage and this is the new frontier? And it's like, what?
Web3, right? Yeah, it's a very fascinating, and it's interesting how you bring up that it can destabilize a democracy or destabilize an economy, because the whole premise of it, right, is if the dollar goes down, then crypto will be worth more. However, we just went through a period of the worst inflation in nearly 50 years, and crypto went down. So I thought that was pretty fascinating, that that was counterintuitive to what I thought the fundamental value of cryptocurrency was.
There's so many points I want to make, but I
We
want to
can,
remind you that the GOP was saying that when they win the majority, they're going to default on the U.S. debt
yes.
and take money out of Social Security and Medicare, et cetera, et cetera. So what would be the outcome of that if they default on the debt and America is no longer viewed as a safe place for people to invest in? It's going to cause the collapse of the United States as the world currency.
It
And
will.
that's why I feel like people like Dave Troy, when they say this is a fascist plan, part of a larger World War III type plan to
Mm.
destroy America, basically, and cause Americans to kill one another, as well as take away our potential influence for human rights and protecting our allies in Ukraine and Taiwan and other places.
That's interesting. I do see it as I do see a lot of nefarious actors exploiting the crypto new frontier of pitching it. And that's all the videos we get bombarded with through advertisements, right? Come join this altcoin. Oh, this one, you're going to get rich. It's a get rich quick for a lot of them. I'm not sure if crypto itself, there's a man above who's pulling the strings, but I will acknowledge that it is a dangerous landscape right now where you're the wild west. And so that kind of brings me to my next point. I think young people like myself, and something you're focused on now, is that we live in the digital age, and it's, in my opinion, the social media has been embedded into our economy, now into our social life. So we can't get off of it even if we want to. But what do you think about that as just a from a mental health perspective of how is this technology eroding something about the human spirit that we should be much more protective against?
Yes, categorically yes. And I just did an interview with one of the world's authorities on the effects on the human mind. Psychiatrist, Harvard psychiatrist Carl D. Marcy, Marci, wrote a book called Rewired, Protecting Your Brain in the Digital Age. And it's a peer-reviewed Harvard University Press book that looks at effects across the developmental system on our brains. And essentially, it's bad. It's more bad than good because, for example, I'm out and about and I'm looking at parents giving phones or screens to little infants to babysit them. And one of the points he makes correctly, I think, as a mental health professional, is that the brain, when a child is born, the brain is bursting with neurons looking to make connections. And part of the human experience is interacting with humans, being with mom, being held by mom, hearing mom's voice, dad, aunts, uncles, grandparents. Our mirror neurons are picking up our environment. And there's a whole range of brain typology that we're exploring and understanding. There's what's called neurotypicals, which is a bell-shaped curve. I'm a neurotypical. And then there's the neuroatypical, including autism spectrum disorder, including really high-functioning spectrum disorder, like Elon Musk, Bill Gates, Zuckerberg, Jobs. And I I went to a training by aane.org on autism, and I listened to a man give a talk named Steve Silberman, who wrote a book called Neurotribes. And his thesis was that the people who created all these major social media platforms were neuroatypicals. So they're more comfortable with screens and coding than interacting with humans. And so they created an environment that works for them, but with the effects on everybody else that isn't neuroatypical, we're getting rewired to be neuroatypical, which includes shortened attention span, shortened ability to concentrate. We're multitasking where we're jumping from one thing to another. We're not doing deep thinking unplugged. And then I just need to say that it's
Wow.
clear, because I know BJ Fogg's work at Stanford Persuasive Labs, that Tristan Harris was a student of his. I know his work. He's the one who taught Zuckerberg and Jobs and everyone else how to make social media addictive so
Addictive.
that it captures our attention, and we need to keep doom scrolling
Yes.
like the ringing bell of Pavlov's dogs. We hear the bell of a notification and we're immediately going to our phone. We're sitting at dinner with our friends, maybe people we haven't seen in years, and phones are out
And it
and
goes
people are
off.
checking phones. Turn them off. Don't even have them in the room. There's actual research that says our brains clear out if we put the phone off in another room rather than turn it off and leave it on the table. In other words, what I'm trying to say is that we need to be in control of computers and social media, not it controlling our minds. And that was actually the title of my first TEDx talk, was is technology controlling our minds? And the answer is yes, it is. And
Yes.
then
And
you add bad actors who want to
exploit it.
confuse, destroy trust in leaders, experts, science, vaccinations, want to promote
Corporations.
conspiracy stuff. That then it makes it even more dangerous, and why it's so important to always, and I hope anyone who's listening to this think, who's the source for this information? Has it been verified?
And I
If it
wonder,
hasn't been verified, don't share it, don't like it, wait, because it will either get shown to be a fraud and disinformation, or it will be exposed by experts as legit.
well, it's just so interesting that Steve Silverman theory you just brought up, that they've created a world that they're comfortable in, but they know, and I will self admit, when I'm feeling uncomfortable, anxious, lonely, depressed, any range of those emotions, there is a giant pull factor for me to pull up my phone and escape those feelings. And that is the world. I'm like, oh, finally, this, I'm around people, I'm around this, but you're not connecting with anybody. And it comes worse. But I wonder, the human mind, the human body, we cannot resist when this technology is in front of us. If you put us in a vulnerable spot, we're going to grab that phone. And before all this technology, we were forced to self-reflect in these moments and solve them in the real world.
Yep.
So, and this is why you said it's creating neuroatypical minds with young people. And that terrifies me. A young person who can now escape onto their phone when you're talking about you're going through puberty, you're going through the first time you're liking a girl, or you're or meeting new friends. Now you don't have to do that. You don't have to go through those fear, which is terrifying. What happens to a child who doesn't experience these things?
Yeah. So the key, Dash, is looking at developmental psychology. We actually know a lot now, including neuroscience, on healthy development and unhealthy development.
Mm-hmm.
And the healthiest development of our mind is real life relations. People we
Yeah.
can look into each other's eyes, hug each other. Like I'm for hugging, like 3 seconds at least with people that you love. Like my wife and I, we hug every morning. It shares oxytocin. It makes you don't feel alone anymore. And it's having real friends that you can just let down your persona rather than a public persona
Right.
that you're projecting to followers. I know you have a lot of followers on Twitter. I have a lot of followers, but how many people actually know me in any
How
real
might I
way
know?
or read my books? Very, very few. And the research is that in a lifetime, a human being maybe has 100 to 150 real connections.
And that's over the span of a lifetime. And it's like,
Yes.
so that's no, but then again, though, if I were to look at my own situation, which sometimes I get carried away, I'm like, well, I have all these hundreds and thousands of followers here. This life is better here than it is in real life. And I mean, that's a dangerous situation.
And because it's not real. And the metaverse is that Zuckerberg is trying to sell to all of us. I did an interview with one of the top computer AI people on the planet, Rand Waltzman, who, by the way, on Twitter, if you're not following him, it's CogSec, Cognitive Security, COGSEC. His overwhelming message is
Wow.
beware the metaverse. Why? Because with AI, we're having an immersive environment where not only where it's as real or close to, it's going to get more and more like real, but the forces that are manipulating us have profiles of our likes, our dislikes. It has images of the people we love and are close to that it can artificially put in politicians' faces and other people like that. That if we're not aware of the technological manipulations that are being done on us, if there's no data privacy and no legislation of these things, people can be programmed into authoritarian cults very fast. It's very scary. The flip side, as you know, my podcast is called The Influence Continuum, and that's influence from ethical to unethical.
Correct.
Technology does a lot of great things. There's some really potent VR experiences in psychology. For example, phobias. You can be afraid of heights, but if you're wearing a helmet and you're sitting in a chair in the middle of your living room, but you look like you're looking down off a cliff, you can accommodate your central nervous system to not freak out anymore, because you are using your prefrontal cortex to analyze, going, I'm feeling all this fear, but there's no danger. You want to empower this part of our brain and not just go with what we're feeling at the moment.
You bring up something very interesting here, and I guess that this just popped into my mind, this question. But let's say we want to solve the phobia of what if we exist without our phones for a couple hours a day? That is a true phobia that I have. Stepping away from my phone
let me interrupt you. I'm going to put on my mental health cap for a moment. So what's the fear? You say you have a phobia that if you don't pick up the phone, what's the fear?
Well, for me personally, I run, I run the podcast. I run some of my, not even a business, just some of the activism I do. And I feel that if I step away from the phone, I will miss out on that piece or that post that may turn into something. And I'm telling you, this is starting me. I begin to think in such a greedy, capitalistic way. And that's not who I am. And as well, if I decide to leave, what if I miss that text from someone? What if I miss out on this social experience? So again, without my phone, I feel sometimes naked and alone, which is terrifying. And it makes me want to go back onto my phone. And I'm sure other people feel this way, or maybe I'm overreacting.
I'm guilty of that too. I am a human being. I'm not perfect, but I really endeavor to walk my talk and be congruent in terms of things. And what you're describing is called FOMO, fear of missing out. And in fact, in chapter 9 of Dr. Marcy's book, really check it out, called Rewired. Listen to my interview with him. He says, substitute FOMO for JOMO. And I said, what's JOMO? Of course, I read the book, but I asked him, joy of missing out.
That's great.
Like, what real life experiences can I have where I'm not sucked into this artificial, reality, and I can be with real friends and be myself, not be an artificial image, etc. It's a balancing act, but my whole work is about freedom of mind. That's what I call my company. It's like I say, it's your mind. You should control it, not someone else, not your phone, not the social media platform, not some political party, left or right political party. You should be thinking What are my values? What is my best life? And I was just reading, I don't know if you know John Pavlowitz. He's on Twitter. He's very
I've
active. He's
heard
a
of him.
Christian pastor that has been messaging like Christianity is not what the Trump base is
Yeah.
promoting at all. Anyway,
Hmm.
he put out a tweet this morning about how he had surgery and basically nearly died. And the idea of when people are
God.
facing imminent death, they're not saying, "Oh, I need to be on Twitter more," or "I should have
Mhm.
made more money." They're thinking about people they love. They're thinking of people who are meaningful to them,
Yeah,
and
we need to
that's
get back to that.
we need to return back to real basic human rights and human values. Like, don't do to others what you don't want done to you.
Hmm. I will
Be
say,
honest. Don't have
yeah,
relationships with liars because you can't
yeah,
trust them. Don't vote for people who are liars or promote lies. Why? Because you can't trust that they really are genuine and that they care about you.
yes.
So,
And
right?
I think something interesting about all of this as well is you talk about, for a long time, the mainstream media perpetuated this narrative, and whether that's a nefarious agenda or they just had the facts wrong, although at the end of the day that doesn't really matter, but they said that there was going to be, the red wave of Republicans winning. And not to get too political here, but I'm sure that put a lot of people, including myself, in a state of constant fear, panic, anxiety of, oh no, the world is doomed, or oh no, we're helpless. And then they got it wrong, which leads me to ask, why would I ever watch these mainstream news networks again when they've put me in an awful state of mind for the past year and they got it wrong? How is that ethical? I mean, it's just crazy to me.
Well, so it's a deeper conversation, which I'd love to have with you. It'll probably take a few hours, but
Condense it.
the bottom line is that there are 5 or 6 media conglomerates that control all the major media. Not your podcast, not my podcast, not the smaller entities, but I'm talking the big
Oh yeah.
channels. And that they seem to be more interested in money and greed and getting a bigger slice of the pie than survival, or like, what kind of planet am I leaving for my children and my grandchildren, and how are they going to judge me, the corporate
Right.
executive, making these decisions, knowing, for example, claiming that the climate crisis is not a crisis and we should put our attention elsewhere. That's what the tobacco industry did for decades. They knew people were dying.
They
And by the
did.
way, have you noticed how the people are smoking again in movies and everything else? That's
Yes.
very deliberate
And the
product
vapes.
placement to get
Yes.
people to be programmed and conditioned that it's cool. Big secret. You want to relax? Take a deep breath.
And stop
It
watching all of
works without
this.
a cigarette. Hey, and you don't
Yeah.
poison your lungs. Hey,
Well,
deep breathing. Yay. Do
it
it.
just this but it's just but what's so interesting about this is that if I want to disconnect from the mainstream media and I also want to disconnect from social media, it's like, well, I am now cutting myself off of virtually all information sources except for hard books or the newspaper. And it's like, are we supposed to return to that?
No, I don't think so. I'm not getting off of Twitter until I'm kicked off of Twitter. I have set up a Mastodon account on Dave Troy's server called Toad.Central, which is a bizarre title, but he thinks it's a big goof, and it's a term that he used forever. But no, I think the key is having multiple sources of information, but using your own judgment, your own curiosity, and finding trustworthy experts who know more than you on a specific topic, not trusting them blindly, but using them as gauges. And what I find is I'm reading 2 to 3 books a week again. It was what I was doing before I got recruited into the Moonies. I love to learn. I have a hunger to
Wow.
learn. And I realize how little I know. And at age 68, I don't think I have that many more years around. So I want to keep learning and passing on what all this knowledge and experience I've developed to the younger generation, which is why I reached out to you, Dash, and said, hey, Dash, let's talk now that the bulk of the midterm election results is out, because it's
Hmm.
clear that young people like yourself are the future. And as the generation, probably your parents' age, or maybe
Hmm.
your grandparents' age, I feel bad for the world we've left your generation. And don't look to us for solutions. Start using all your genius brain power and creativity to come up with out-of-the-box new approaches for how we can live planetarily together. Like, we're
Wow.
now at a planetary extinction period. And I do want to make one more comment that I grew up in the nuclear bomb age. Like, I literally got under my
Yes.
wooden desk in elementary school in case Russia nuked us. Like, I grew up with that fear
Gosh, the
that there
Cold
were
War.
thousands of missiles aimed at New York, you know,
Hmm.
and it was like, what the hell are we supposed to do? Okay, let's get high. Let's tune
Yeah.
out, you know,
Right. Let's do some acid,
because
right?
that, but that's what's happening now. A lot of people are into psychedelics and they're just tuning out, or they're spending all their time on video games or other things instead of contributing their unique powers and resources to finding solutions that are sustainable.
I just wonder about these solutions because one of the modes of communication that's popular, as you know, among Generation Z and the generation above us, millennials, is social media, which is the very tool that we're making this claim that is so awful for our mental health. So I try to use it for good with this podcast. I try to remain unbiased. I try to just put information out there and invite experts like yourself on to speak. But it's like I can't get off of it because then we let the disinformation purveyors win. And this technology can be used to both destroy our generation, and the fossil fuel industry can use it to, with advertising and messaging, to further erode our planet and cause global warming, or we can use this technology to save the planet. So we're in such a very dilemma here where, like you said, it's the young people's job to figure out solutions, but we've got a lot of awful gadgetry at our hands that I question sometimes. Is this social media the answer, or do we need to wean off of it altogether?
But no, I don't think it's an all or nothing. And I'm very nervous about anyone who's very, you know, black and white, all or nothing, good versus evil, us versus them. That's very simplistic. We live in a complex system. And I definitely think what we want is more engagement, not less engagement. But we need to interact in the real world. Now, when we had the pandemic and people had to be socially isolated and everything, it just sped up the anxiety, the depression. So many people are taking medication where they should be working out, or they should be hugging, or making love, or going bowling together, or playing softball, or, you know, raking leaves, playing with their puppies, doing human
Going on a
things.
walk even. And just really quickly there, but there was a lot of people during the coronavirus pandemic who did not have a relationship, did not have friends, did not have their family where they're living in the same state as them. And that's where, because I went to attended UCLA during the masks period, and
Yep.
I must say it was awful. I mean, what it takes away the whole experience. And so I understand why people are so resistant to wanting to put the mask on. It just creates so much isolation. And then you have your digital social media where you turn to, and it further perpetuates the loneliness. So, but I couldn't say these things before because then, you know, I felt that I would perhaps be attacked by the left for saying, oh, you're an anti-masker. I'm like, well, I'm not an anti-masker. I'm pointing out that there are some consequences Two, wearing the mask, especially for young people, where it takes away, I think, some important social experiences that we should have.
Definitely. No question. So I want to go back to a central thesis in the Cult of Trump book that I wrote that came out in 2019, if I may. And that is the concept of fourth and now fifth generation warfare, psychological warfare,
Right.
where state actors, but like Russia and China, but also Christian extremists, neo-Nazis, other people with extremist agendas are literally messaging to create polarization where there are these extremists on the left and the right that
Yeah.
are dominating so much of the airwaves and our brain waves, but we really shouldn't be paying attention as much. And that's where the actual coding of the algorithms and Twitter and Facebook, etc., are so deleterious. And I want to do a shout out to the Center for Humane Technology, Tristan Harris, Asa Raskin. In fact,
Was
Tristan was just on 60 Minutes a week ago talking about if we don't change the algorithms, if we don't deselect for greed and select for values and community and positivity, if we can't do that, then I do think people need to make better choices of where they're spending their digital time.
but he's
Check
I just
out chapter 9 of Karl Marcy's book, because he's a big advocate for using technology but not being used by technology.
I read what Tristan Harris is talking about there, though, in a larger, broader perspective, is to ask corporations to go against making money for the betterment of humanity. And it's like asking a vegan to eat a steak, right? It's not going to happen.
I
You can't.
disagree. I
I
actually disagree with that
you,
thesis. In the
okay.
short run, greed wins. You know, the profit margin for the quarter wins. But in the long run, people are going to leave the platform. So I want to go back to one of my teachers, Robert Cialdini, who wrote one of the most famous books called Influence. He came up with 6 universal principles of influence.
Good title.
And he said, if you're going to use these techniques unethically, in other words, if you're using it on people, but you wouldn't want them used on you, or you wouldn't want them used on your mother or your wife or your boyfriend or your husband or whatever, don't use them, because people will not trust you. Like, you can con them a certain point and then people go, not going to do it anymore. And that's what I think in the bigger picture in American politics is happening. There's a lot of fatigue about
Yes.
you know, the election denial and how evil all people who aren't in the GOP are, because they're trafficking and drinking blood of children. Nonsense stuff,
Right.
right?
Right.
But they're fatigued with that, and people need to, you know, we need to have conversations with each other and not attack each other. And that's
Right.
what the big shift that I think needs to happen, where there's more effort to educate people about social psychology, how the mind works, how to listen to each other, not just think about how we're going to respond to a question, but actually listen to what the person's saying and reflect on it, right?
Right.
And like, how many people turn off their social media an hour or two before they go to sleep at night and listen to
I
music or write a journal or
read.
play with their dog or their cat? Like, we need to do more self-care. And now I'm going to give a lecture on sleep and just how we need 7 to 9 hours sleep average for our brain to work properly. Most Americans are sleep deprived, which means they're not using their thinking. They're going with their emotions. In other words, instead of evolving and developing, we're devolving. We're going back to a childish state of simplistic all or nothing, good versus evil, instead of going, wait a minute, there may be another side to this position that I don't know. Let me ask. I'm
Well, that's
intelligent. Let me ask and see if I'm missing something, and be
it's
prepared to change your mind. That was another
right.
TEDx I did. How can I know if I've been brainwashed? Unplug from social media and media, study
Hmm.
models of mind control, deliberately seek out contrarians, ex-members, critics of your position, then reflect on your involvement using the models of brainwashing, using the information you've now deliberately exposed yourself to, and self-reflect and ask, if I knew then what I know now, would I have ever done X? And if
I
the
just
answer is no,
mhm.
time to leave.
Well,
And
it's
there shouldn't be a stigma and a fear. Oh, people, my relatives are going to say that I told you so. Trump was a cult leader. Don't say that to people. Invite them back into your lives and find common ground.
yeah. I think that's just so uh interesting and paradoxical that we have to unplug in order to find out if we're being played or we're being mind controlled. And yet after we find out the truth, then we go right back on to the platforms, which we're now the digital control. It's happening online. You know, there are YouTubers who many are addicted to. I get caught up in some people where I want to watch all their videos, and then I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm being pulled into this toxic relationship between me and this person who I've never met. It happened to me, like I said in our podcast before, with Tony Robbins, all the self-help gurus. I was addicted to that stuff. I was reading their books, watching their sermons, their speeches, their
Because you're
conventions.
bright and you want to learn, and you didn't have a high, not high, but you didn't have a refined way of evaluating what's healthy, who's the legitimate expert and who's bogus.
Right.
Like when I'm a big fan of ethical therapeutic uses of hypnosis for dealing with all kinds of issues and problems. But right now there's no regulation, and a lot of people are using NLP and hypnosis like Tony Robbins to make money and to recruit and to get
Right.
a big following. So, the thing is we learn, like the fact that we're talking right now. I hope you and your listeners will reflect on these things,
Yes.
and try turning your phone off. Like, try giving yourself, and that's what I like about the Apple thing, where they can measure your screen time. The average American adult is online 11 hours a day.
My goodness. Now it's
11
Dr.
hours, and our attention span is getting shorter and shorter and shorter. And that's not good. We need to know how to concentrate, how to think deeply about a subject. And by the way, I get into what you just described. I'll find somebody like Adam Grant. I discovered Adam Grant. I'm like, oh my God, I've got to read this guy's books. He's one of the top social psychologists in the world. And he's taught me so much. So I will listen to his podcast. Not every single one, because I want to expose my brain to lots of things. But the thing is you have X number of hours today. How do you want to use it?
Right. Now, Dr. Stephen Hassan, let me just, for the audience there, because I want to ask you, what is some advice that you could give to us? Speaking of, offering free advice here, what can you offer to us who say, hey, we want to take a break from digital. We want to find out, who we really are. We want to disconnect from our digital gurus, our podcasts, our Twitter, our TikTok, or all of that. What is the most effective thing we can do to perhaps self-hypnotize into, uncovering who we really are and finding ourselves again, to disconnect in this
So you
digital era?
mentioned self-hypnosis. I actually am a big advocate for self-hypnosis.
What is that?
I it's going inside and giving yourself positive messaging. Like, for example, one of the first things I learned 45 years ago when I started was going to a safe place in your mind. What's a safe place? Well, it's an imaginary place where you can go and no one can hurt you, and you can just be real and be yourself. And some
Mhm.
people make a desert island, some people have a mountaintop retreat or whatever. But the idea of visualizing yourself in the future, doing what you want to do, being the kind of person you want to be, is very, very powerful. That's how I did my doctorate, honestly. Without using self-hypnosis and I saw a therapist for a period of time. I didn't have the confidence I could do a PhD in my mid-60s. But I was so passionate about wanting to update the
Mm.
law to have a frame to understand undue influence, that was my driver. So that's what I largely did while I was in COVID land, was doing online courses and writing chapters for books and ultimately my dissertation. Listen, you're a human being, you're an adult. Turn off your phone. Try it for an hour.
Mm-hmm. It's as
What do you
simple as
want to
that.
do?
Yeah.
And I would encourage you, Dash. I don't know you, but I have childhood friends. Call them. I have
Yeah.
sisters. I have nephews and nieces. Hi, how are you? What's going on in your life, etc. It fulfills me.
It
And
does.
lastly, I like helping people. It gives me energy. I love hearing from people who say, "Oh, your book saved my life 30 years ago. Now I'm married, I have a PhD, and I have 3
Mhm.
kids." I'm like, I'm joyful because
Yeah.
it keeps feeding this energy because the world needs good energy right
So
now.
so it seems to me that one of the conclusions here is to just get back into the real world in any way that you can, to just have a real contact instead of diving deeper into this online space that's going to be here forever.
Just think about, it's my mind. I want to control it. I don't want to be controlled by other people. I don't want to be controlled by other groups. And I don't want to be controlled by any machine or artificial environment.
Mhm.
And act as if your time and your mind and your body are precious, because they are.
Yep. And what
And, just like be grounded in your body in the here and now. I'm going to ask you another therapeutic question I often ask my clients, Dash.
free
Again, we
I
don't know
love
each
free
other well.
therapy. Yes.
Yeah, it's not there. It's the kind of therapy I do, which is educational. It's sharing my own journey and my clients' journeys. But the question is, think back in your life to when you felt the most you.
Mm. Wow. That's a powerful question. It's a very powerful. It's when I've got to say, it's when I am doing something, doing an activity. I can't think of a specific moment, but it's when I'm lost in some passion of mine, or when I'm not thinking, when I am
So
communicating with
sounds like
someone.
you're describing a flow state where
Yes.
you're immersed into an activity, which is typical with sports and music and writing books and etc., which is a good state, flow states. Stephen Kotler is one of the top people on flow states these days.
Mm-hmm.
But when I have clients coming to me who were born in cults, they were abused, they were traumatized, and they're like, "Steve, you were recruited into the Moonies at 19. You had an identity. You had something to go back to. I don't know who I am. And what can I say to them?" I ask them, "When do you feel the most you?" And they often say, "I don't know." I say, "Tell me next week. Think about it." And they come back with, when I'm playing guitar, when I'm
Mm-hmm.
teaching children, when I'm walking in the woods, when I'm hiking, when I'm climbing, when I'm playing a certain sport. So that gives a foundation for sense of self. And then they say, "Yeah, but I didn't have healthy parents. I don't know what." And I have to teach them, like, what's normal developmental psychology, what
Mm-hmm.
are the, what's normal. And I ask people to create the self they want to be. And they're like, "You can do that?" And I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
"Damn, for sure, yes."
Wow. It's a great feeling. It's what a powerful question. I'm still stuck in. I want to feel more. and this is me speaking generally, I feel most people want to feel more like themselves as opposed to feeling powerless. And there are
Yep.
a lot of vices today that can trigger that powerlessness feeling.
Yep.
So the
Yeah, so
disconnection.
the thing is, you're very bright, and bright people tend to spend a lot of time in their thinking and
Yep.
their anxiety and their worrying about a future that hasn't happened yet.
Yeah.
The flip
Guilty.
side are people spending too much time reliving trauma that has already happened, and there's no trauma happening right now. That's why it's so important. My teaching is about being in your body in the here and now with a positive future orientation. And when people say, I don't know what I want to do, I say, pick something. You can always change your mind, but
Mm.
have a target. And if you're thinking ahead, you think developing skill sets. Like one of the best skill set that young people can develop is how to speak, how to communicate, how to listen, how
Wow.
to public speak.
How to
Get
write,
good at that, because you can use it in a billion areas, right?
work on these real skills and passions that we have. And
Yeah.
we have to avoid the traps of, sometimes we fall into a trap of, well, oh, this is not going to make me money, and this, I don't know how to get a career from this, and then we stop doing what we love because of the pressure to achieve financial security.
Yeah, so the whole programming of Americans, and therefore the world, about consumerism and the need to consume to feel happy, you're not happy. You buy a nice car, you're happy for a few days or weeks, and it's not happy. Go for fulfilling things that feed your soul, right?
Mm.
And if you haven't seen a
Mm.
documentary called The Century of the Self by Adam Curtis, all about Edward Bernays, who is the godfather of PR, public relations, go back in time and understand the evolution of the psychology of influence. Because what Bernays said, he wrote a book called Propaganda in 1928. He said, don't sell a person a product, sell them on the need for a product. Then they'll buy the
Mm.
product.
Wow.
Right?
That,
So
that's
it's that psychology. I need to be sexy, so I'm going to buy a car with the beautiful woman on it or the
Mhm.
handsome guy on it to associate that physical object with happiness. But that's not what real happiness is. And if you're believing that, that's, PR and marketing.
Yep.
And in the end, like I said, when people are facing death, they're not thinking about, I wish I had bought, a better car, or I wish I had earned more money. They're not thinking that at all. They're like thinking of love and the people they feel close to, that they've shared deep experiences with.
Right. What we're all looking for is freedom of mind, which is your website. It's one of your big books. And as well, we're looking to disconnect from all of this, especially after a tumultuous political year of the coronavirus. I think everyone's ready to settle down and just enjoy life the way it used to be before all of this digital era. So I just
Yeah, I'm
wanted
not
to.
going to encourage your listeners to disconnect completely yet, but I do think it's time to start realizing you don't want to
Understanding.
be on automatic pilot,
Yeah.
with your technology, and actually turn off your phone and say, I'm going to check email 3 times a day and
Mhm.
not do it all day long. And experiment with what works for you. In the meantime, do you know your neighbors? Do you hang out at all?
Oh, I
You
hate my
do any,
neighbors.
you do any charity work? You hate your neighbors? Time to move.
Yeah, I'm just joking, but I mean that's the mindset that we enter, right? I like that advice. Let's try to keep it in moderation for what you say. Some maybe need
Balance and control, because
some
there are a
balance.
lot of benefits. I've learned a ton being online,
Hey, that's
and
how we met. That's how we met.
Yeah, and to be honest, I'm going to do a shout out to Dan McAllister, who is the son of a Republican state senator who is a never Trumper. And he contacted me, I don't know, 3 years ago on Twitter. He said, I love your work and you suck on Twitter. Like, you don't know what you're doing. I said, I know, I don't know. He said, let me teach you. I'm like, thank you. And I wound up hiring him part-time. And that's how I got a following, because I understood the game. But I'm old school. Like my last video game was Pac-Man. I mean, seriously, I don't do video games.
You're
I don't
not
have the
missing out.
time. I'm doing
No.
real work.
Good. And keep doing that work, Dr. Hassan. And I encourage everyone to check out his podcast, The Influence Continuum, and check out the website Freedom of Mind, because we all need to get some freedom. So, Dr. Hassan, I really appreciate you coming on today once again. Pleasure.
Yeah, thanks so much. You know, young people are our future. I just want to say that. And we need to pull together the greatest resource that we have on earth, which is the human spirit and the human imagination. And it just feels better to act out of love and compassion and empathy than out of hatred and fear.
Amen to that. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to follow and subscribe to the show. Help spread the word about uncovering the truth by giving us a 5-star review and sharing the show with a friend. We're available on Apple, YouTube, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thank you for listening, and as always, I will continue to uncover the truth. The Uncovering the Truth theme song was created and produced by Pokari.